Legacy of a Traitor. Chapter 10. The next day, we were commanded to bring Vels into vassalage under Error, a proud village from beyond the border of the Jormund River. Vels had given the King Shield's aid in a battle long ago, and we still owed them a boon. Even so, I did not falter. There was nothing that could be done to stop our dominating storm, though my heart cracked with every swing of my axe. When we returned, bearing the heads of their leaders and warriors, the Errorites hid from us. Only King Genra lifted us up again to our rightful place. Verse 10 of the Confessional Monolith. Though Seth had often imagined what it might feel like to command the weapon of the Surnir family, he had never expected to feel such perplexity and worry once it was in his hands. The creature, Jin apparently, was skittering up the stairwell behind him as what could only be described as a dark-scaled lizard with 1,000 tiny legs. Valmir occasionally glanced back at Jin, and Seth instinctively did the same. Why was the old guard so unusually skittish? The creature was strange, certainly, but Valmir had seen it before. Seth looked at the creature for the 10th time, concern furrowing his brow. Jin continued to stare up at him with an elongated snout, still bearing a wide smile upon that absurdly stretched row of teeth.
"My, sir, you should be careful not to trip on the stairs in your enraptured state. I know my appearance draws the easily impressed, but if you keep staring like that, I'll blush."
It snickered with a grating high pitch as Seth turned away, leaving him with a feeling of mild annoyance and a wealth of confusion. First Valmir's worry, then this. Why did Jin fling mockeries at him with such wild abandon? From what he remembered of his father, that wouldn't be tolerated for a moment. Jin had recognized Seth as a master, but perhaps one so monumentally lesser than his father that it felt safe to treat him like a fool. Maybe it was right to do so. As Seth was preparing to ask Jin about its brazen tongue, Valmir halted in front of him.
"We're at the top, your lordship. Shall I see if your order to clear the way is completed?"
Nodding, Seth breathed a sigh of relief. "Yes, thank you, Valmir. I hadn't thought of ensuring that. I'll await you here. Can you also call for an order of food to be prepared quickly? Some bread and sealed fruit sauce will do, as well as some eggs if the kitchen has a fire going." He glanced at Jin once again. How much would such a creature eat? It said it didn't need anything to live, and yet it had a desire to consume. "Make it a very large order if possible. Then have it be brought by Madame Aethel and Ser Gierno to the grove just beyond the eastern wall, the one called Noonshadow. If we wish to keep Jin a secret, that will be an excellent place to do so. There's little chance of unwanted eyes." Valmir bowed, though his gaze was fixed on Jin as well, then set his torch on a sconce in the wall and opened the bronze doorway, letting the bright light of the illuminated stone beyond rush into the darkness. After so long in the dim tunnels, Seth winced. Jin barely seemed to notice, staring up at the gray ceiling instead. Its snout was shifting about, eyes glazed to a dull green. What was he doing?
"You know, your lordship, I could have just told you that the halls above and around us are empty,"
Jin muttered, the piercing color filling his eyes again as he looked back at Seth with a slight scowl. Seth narrowed his eyes at the willful tone. "If you wish to address me, Lord Surnir will do, Jin." Sighing, the creature shifted back to its hooded, humanoid form and leaned against the wall like a petulant youth, smirking back at Seth.
"As you grumbly wish, Lord Surnir. I've just noticed it has gotten fairly crowded up there since your father's time. I do hope you finished the construction, as I've been looking forward to seeing the true majesty of a fully realized Aurorian fortress with my own eyes for the past however long it's been."
Already the creature knew of the larger population of the Citadel. Seth had seen its eyes shift in color. Was that linked? "You can see through solid walls. That is a rather remarkable ability, Jin. How do you do it?" The creature scoffed, or at least made an indignant sound in its throat.
"Really now? You don't have the physicality of one who moves about very often, yet you apparently have an aversion to reading as well. What is it that you do, besides mope about in your middling melancholy, master?"
Seth hadn't ever expected that talking to his father's secret would be so exhausting, but at least in its efforts to insult him, it betrayed a weakness. "So you see through walls, but not through thoughts. I've read nearly every written word in this valley, but none have come close to speaking of a creature like yourself. If there is such a book, it doesn't exist here." The creature was very still for a moment. Then, with a sudden movement of the neck, it began to laugh in the same high-pitched tone that it used down in the chamber.
"Really now? That's disappointing. And then I suppose I'll just have to explain, though I pity the poor fare of House Cernier's librarians.
Again, the creature spoke in such a confusing way. What sort of secret weapon would be written of in a widely available tome?
I have the remarkable ability to observe that which cannot be seen, to peer into the reality of what is around me down to the very pulse of a rat. It is how none of your foes can ever hide from my inevitable might.
The creature raised a hand, staring at its flowing form with the typical grin. Though its confidence was oddly reassuring, Seth felt a chill pass through him upon hearing the relish in Jin's voice. At least knowing it had some sort of absurd spatial awareness was a good first step in understanding this thing. The creature glanced upwards again, still leaning against the wall.
As I said, it appears that the hall has been cleared. Here comes old Fearful in 3, 2, 1.
Valmy appeared at the end of the hall, and he motioned for Seth to follow him, his eyes constantly flitting to and from the creature. "A dozen eggs are being prepared. A loaf of bread is being fetched from the kitchen, and Sir Eldred's promised the sweetest concoction in the cellars, your lordship. They'll be ready in a few minutes, delivered straight to the eastmost postern. Madam Athel will be bringing them, and she has motioned for the main feast to begin soon after so as to ensure privacy." "Excellent. Good of her to do so. Let's be off, Jin." The creature sighed.
Why is it that every Cernier is so shameful of my existence that he would go to such lengths just to keep me a secret? It's as if you find the power to easily kill all of your enemies to be dishonorable or something.
"I don't know what sort of masters you served before my father, but we Cerniers won't rule with fear. He paused as the memory of the last letter he wrote to the outskirt stewards rose to the forefront of his mind, and with it, a piercing guilt. "Besides, while there are foes that I may need you to defeat, I primarily summoned you to protect. That is within your capabilities, yes?"
Of course it is, especially from all those people you threatened.
"No, that's not—" Seth took a deep breath, trying to hold back this sense of anger that he'd never felt before. He'd always berated himself for any radical measures and warnings he'd given to the outskirt stewards, but to have someone else belittle him for it was horrifically aggravating, especially when it was coming from the very weapon he had threatened them with. "I only promised retribution for the sake of continued peace. I never thought to actually kill them."
Is that because you are so high and mighty, or did you simply not think you could command me?
Jin grinned.
This was the first time you've summoned me, and all your surprise is very apparent. Now that you've got my skills at your beck and call, who's to say that your empty bark won't become a vindictive bite?
Seth could do little but stare aghast as the creature laughed.
Not that I care what you do. I'm simply a willing servant, after all.
A new coldness was being drawn through Seth's body, focusing his mind and distilling his anger into words that he spoke with a quiet and trembling voice. "I will not succumb to killing my own people out of fear. Never insult me like that again."
Ah, that is the one thing I may be unable to do.
It grinned at him with a wider mouth than usual.
But don't worry. I'm sure you can prove all my perceptions wrong.
Even if Jin couldn't read his thoughts, his observation was frighteningly penetrating. Seth remained silent at that final jab as the icy passion in his blood began to fade, leaving him feeling exhausted and annoyed. Even so, he knew that this was just another manifestation of his own weakness. Though he hated that Jin had wrenched it out of him with just a few words, it must be understood and dealt with if he was to ever attain to his father's capability. In a twisted way, this might be another boon offered by his father's secret, though he couldn't get over how much he detested it. "I don't need to prove anything to you, just to those I've sworn to protect. Now follow me." With that, he swept up the hall and to where Valmir was waiting. Though he hadn't heard the whispered conversation, Seth could tell that the guards saw the remnants of anger on his face, and so they all went on in silence. As they reached the end of the corridors and Valmir opened the door to the eastern gardens, Jin spoke up once more.
"Oh, we're not eating in the dining hall? The way the window light shone on the food there made it wonderfully appetizing, though I didn't get to taste it then. We had many pleasant memories there, right, old Fearful?"
The creature stared at Valmir with a gleeful smile, and Seth saw the guard's jaw tense in fear.
"You remember the way your gorge rose and splattered on the floor, yes? Its color matched the intestines on the wall."
Valmir's face paled, and he stepped back, shaking in a way that Seth had never seen before. Though Jin's description had unsettled him, its effect upon the old guard was far more frightening. Even so, Seth had to maintain his courage. "Enough, Jin. Not another word until we reach the grove." It bowed its head, but the grin remained. Seth turned to Valmir, unsure of what to say. stand watch by the stairwell base in the main hall for now and calm yourself. Have Marty bring you some more tea. You'll feel better very soon. After hesitating for a moment, the trembling guard shook his head.
No, young lordship. If that creature tries anything, I need to be there.
Seth helped Volmir to sit upon a nearby bench as his knees began to shake. I just need to talk to the weapon with Madame Aethel and Eldred. Jin is a strange creature, and he disturbs me immensely, but I can assure you he will obey me as a Surnir. Don't worry. He hoped Jin couldn't tell he was trying to convince himself about that as well. I promise to do only what is necessary for peace in the valley. Velmir didn't say anything else, but bowed in acceptance. As he crossed the empty garden grounds bathed in moonlight, Jin following closely behind, Seth's mind was fixated on the creature's words and Volmir's reaction to them. What exactly had his father commanded Jin to do? He had used the creature to end the evil lords who sought to take the valley by force, but justice had been done. What part of the story had been omitted? His father was honorable and intelligent, but there was surely a reason for Volmir's fear. Especially after Jin's piercing comments earlier, Seth felt rattled almost as badly as when Cullen had reported the threat. No, he had to get a hold of himself. Doubt was the last thing he needed at this moment. First, he would deal with the encroaching armies. Then he would delve into the past, and both could only be done when he understood exactly what this creature could do. The small doorway built into the eastern wall was almost entirely hidden from sight, but the stylistic mural of an enchanting little plot of trees surrounded by yellow-painted ribbons hanging in an arc over it on either side of the wall gave away its location regardless. Though the doorway was intended for subterfuge and warfare, it had been used as the easiest way to reach the Noon Shadow Grove for the past few decades, a popular place for romantic meetings and outdoor picnics for the inhabitants of the Citadel. That the original purpose was likely to return, and so the old and charming painting should be destroyed, only added to Seth's tense melancholy as he motioned for Jin to follow him.
Is it truly the wisest decision to leave the safety of your citadel? Evil eavesdropping eyes could be anywhere, you know, watching and spying and letting loose all your secrets about me.
Seth glared at him. You yourself boasted of that ability to see even into the pulse of a rat. If you are as good as your word, that shouldn't be an issue. You haven't lied to me, have you?
Oh, I wouldn't dream of it. I just thought you might want to know of any potential concerns, given what a paranoid princeling you are.
As he set the moat-side canoe into the water, Seth stifled his snapping reply. It's nearly dark out. With the evening feast and the concern of nocturnal creatures rising, there won't be anyone there but my family. The grove is wide enough for you to demonstrate your abilities so that we can decide how best to utilize them. He paused for a moment as he sat in the small boat, which was bobbing a bit more than he'd like, and tied the bridge rope to the edge. For example, can you swim? Jin grinned.
My maneuverability is second to no creature that walks this world, and I dare say at least third to those who skulk about in the deep. If you need a demonstration...
The creature's skin began to pulse and stretch to extreme degrees, like a lump of sea-lion's dough, and within the time it took Seth to gasp, Jin's form had thinned and grown to nearly 12 feet in length, becoming the spitting image of the dread sea dragon carved on the doorway of the old dining hall. Though he'd seen it all his life, and imagined the real thing in its storied mile-long form many times, the sudden splash and undulation of the vicious-looking creature through the wide moat still nearly sent his heart shooting up to his throat. He'd barely had the chance to look behind him to the other side of the water before Jin burst from the depths, coiling and morphing in the air before landing on 2 humanoid feet in his hooded form, both arms spread out in dramatic fashion. The creature bent backwards till his flashing green eyes met Seth, and he laughed.
Perhaps I underestimated myself. I'd say that was faster than the real thing.
Seth breathed out. Next time, just answer my question. He paddled over, drawing the folded bridge across and trying to ignore the disconcerting giggles from the creature behind him. It could change its form on a whim, but every one it had taken was roughly the same in terms of the general volume. The facsimile of Seth had been slightly larger than himself, but the ocean serpent had been far smaller than the doorway's carving made it appear to be. Jin could change everything about himself but his mass. That was a limit, but one that was utterly laughable in the face of such power. Madame Aethel and Sir Eldred will be here soon, Seth continued as he fastened the bridge to its end pole. They'll meet us in the center of the grove. Jin squinted towards the small arrangement of trees.
This grove of yours doesn't seem to be as large as you implied, but as you said, no one of sapient mind is there. I'll admit it is rather pretty with those spherical lanterns shedding such a nice warm light. It really helps to bring out that romantic feel of light-dazzled bugs buzzing about your ear.
Seth ignored Jin's comment. though he wondered if this obsession with diminishing the good of anything around it was the result of being sealed away for so long. It hadn't gone mad in those 30 years stuck in a lightless room, so it was clearly made up of something more mentally resilient than any normal creature. That durability extended to its form as well, it seemed. I saw the way you cut through the water. Those fins were as sharp as any blade. I take it that is your primary means of combat, shifting your body into any sort of weapon. Jin continued to stare up and around as they entered the grove, its eyes pulsing back and forth between the observing gray and the usual green.
That is correct. Though I do have other skills, I've yet to find a creature that can't be slain by a blade, especially when it can flow and bend and seek out the slightest chink in any armor. In fact,
The creature stiffened, almost crouching in sudden anticipation of something. Seth instinctively glanced around as well, but he could see nothing out of the ordinary, nor hear anything beyond the faint tone of the golden gong in the great hall, signaling the beginning of the evening meal.
What was that for?
Jin whispered with an aggressive growl through his sharp teeth. Before Seth could say anything, or even give place to the fear that he'd broken some unspoken rule, the creature stood up again and resumed its laid-back demeanor with a short laugh.
Don't tell me you're using that thing as a dinner bell.
Well, we use it for any event in which everyone is called to the Great Hall, but yes.
Then allow me to inform you that I can hear that thing from practically any distance. To ring it so loudly when I haven't even been given a chance to know what to do with it is downright cruel, Master Seth. Did your father despise you so much that he didn't teach you even a single thing about me?
I'm sorry, Seth said quietly, any anger he felt at that insult buried under the worry that part of what the creature said might be true. His father hadn't despised him, surely, but the fact that he'd never left even a message about how to use Jin spoke to the possibility that he never expected or wanted Seth to use it. If even the golden gong he'd known all his life was connected to this strange weapon, what else was there that might be essential in knowing how to control it?
You certainly should be. Any other loud clattering will do for a dinner bell, so if you would be kind enough to overcome your own ignorance, I would prefer it if you used that instrument only as a signal.
Jin had seemed to fully regain its ethereally overbearing confidence, and it leapt over to one of the trees near a small table, leaning back against it with arms folded and burying a sly smile. Well, Jin, if there is so much I should know about you, now is the time for me to learn. Seth sat down at the table and stared at the creature with hands folded, trying to regain some intimidation. Tell me, what are these rules that can control you? Jin's smile faded slightly and it shook its head.
I would love to do so, but I must warn you that they are secrets even to me. Only the signal of the gong was revealed, as it was the very one that your father used back in the day. I know there were others, and I was hoping you were aware of them yourself.
It shrugged apologetically.
If it is any consolation, the only absolute is that I will perform any duties you desire of me, and I will not betray you. I'll swear that on your old man's soul.
Though its words seemed to be genuine, it continued to speak in a high voice, unmarred by any semblance of guilt. Regardless, whether it was due to malicious deception or genuine ignorance, the fact that even the weapon itself couldn't help Seth know exactly how to control it was distressing. He would have to ensure that his commands to it were clear above all else. Seth crossed his arms. Those words bear more weight than you'd imagine. If that is your oath, then I shall accept it. Jin turned its head towards the citadel, as if barely considering Seth's words, and after a brief moment its grin widened.
It seems that 2 more are approaching, and they bear quite the succulent feast.
A moment later, Seth could hear the tread of Madame Aethel and Sir Gierno on the moat's bridge, and the generally loud sounds of theorizing from the latter. The creature glanced at Seth.
That one's Madame Aethel, and I take it the other is your double. I suppose the 2 of you balance out to look like a proper lord, but I must say it's quite the odd choice.
Seth glared at Jin. They are both my direct family, so you would do well to heed their commands.
Truly? Well, I will consider it.
Jin closed its eyes in thought for a moment.
All considered. Sorry, Sir Nier, but you're the only master for me.
Then it seemed delegating the power in any way was out of the question, though why he alone held the authority only raised more of them. Fine, but I command you to not harm them in any way.
I'm saddened you think of me as such a rabid beast. Don't worry, no injury shall befall them at my flesh.
Seth nodded, still a little hesitantly, and waved at his family to greet them as they entered the confines of the grove. The 2 of them were each carrying a large basket of food, each filled with several dozen different selections of the requested morsels, altogether enough for a small company of guards to partake in. As they saw Seth and the creature behind him, their reaction was immediate. Both wore faces of emotion more intense than he'd ever seen, but in the typical Giorno way, they both portrayed opposite extremes. El dropped the basket he was carrying, the jars of fruit fortunately cushioned by the several bread rolls, and he rushed forward, mustache quivering with the excitement his eyes radiated.
So, you're not an animal or a smoky spirit, or at least you know how to appear very person-like. Can you talk?
Madame Athel was silent, but her fists were clenched at her basket's handles, and her face was twisted in an expression Seth had never seen her wear before. Her eyes. They looked just like Volmir's had a few minutes ago. Jin's grin opened with a laugh.
Ah, two more familiar faces. It's nice to see you again, Athel, though you've become older and grayer than the husk you live in.
It turned to Sir Gierno.
Meanwhile, you've gotten very big and incredibly less cute. And yes, I can talk, and probably better than you.
Seth looked with surprise from Jin to Sir Gierno. You've met El before, Jin? Sir Eldred shook his head as he moved closer.
No, I don't think so. Though if it can appear and act like a person, maybe I've met it dozens of times without knowing. How exciting indeed!
No, it was just once. Madame Athel barely spoke above a whisper, and El didn't seem to hear her. He rushed up to Jin, much to Seth's concern, and he began to poke and prod at the creature, circling about to investigate every side.
El, be careful. Of what? You seem to have good control over it, Lord Cernier, and I do so want to know what exactly it is.
Seth took a quick breath and nodded tentatively. He should have known Sir Gierno would have taken such an interest. Though he realized upon seeing his brother's investigation, it was odd that Seth hadn't inquired what sort of being Jin was. He supposed that he had been far more concerned with what Jin could do, rather than any details about what sort of creature served him.
Animal, mineral, vegetable, or perhaps even mythic to Palak. Can't be the last one fully. You seem to have some physicality, though you were said to be nothing but smoke. How fascinating!
El pressed a finger against Jin's amused face.
Your skin seems to be human-like, and your clothes feel like cloth, but the shade of grey and green is unlike any I've heard exist. Are you from across the ocean to the east or south?
Jin grinned.
My, you are a bold and inquisitive one, especially with bearing no blood to cause me to speak.
El ignored the obvious refusal and continued.
Also, how are you able to recognize us after so long? Can you see our very souls?
I'm flattered you think so highly of my ability. The toothpick tyrant here got me to admit that I can observe nothing more than the perfect physical space around me. Just chalk my perfect recognition up to my marvelous intuition.
Jin glanced around the grove, as if expecting applause for its obnoxious explanation. That's enough introduction, Jin. As Seth took his seat, he could feel a torrent of worry about the approaching clans of Rotrar and Markelt begin to rise again. Those thoughts had been kept at bay by the wonder and renewed hope of having found his father's weapon, but a new fear arose that bolstered all others. What if this creature wasn't truly loyal to him? Was the promise it made to serve him nothing more than a deception? It was unrelenting in the way it insulted and belittled him, while doing nothing but puffing itself up. Worse, everyone else was either fearful of or fascinated by Jin, but they hadn't spoken against it because they trusted Seth had control. He would need to find a way to prove it, to ensure that he controlled this creature and no one else. Seth cleared his throat. First, as we indulge in the food, you will tell us what it is you can do exactly. I know my father used you for battle in the past, but the details were hidden from all but himself. He never had the chance to pass on that knowledge to me, and so we will build an exact plan based on what you can offer. Jin looked at all three of the Genernites before chuckling.
And I assume that both of you couldn't provide our little lord with the information he desires? Truly, none of you have the slightest care for the preservation of literature. Fine, I will relate to you what I can do as best I can.
With that, the color and opacity of the creature began to change, appearing as if made of grey mist. The form itself remained mostly the same, with the same grinning, hooded figure, but to Seth and the others' astonishment, it had almost entirely disappeared in a moment. After a couple seconds, it had entirely vanished.
Clapping, El said, "That's quite the unnerving trick. You are still here, right? Or did you go back to whatever slumber you were just in?"
Seth glanced around, noting that there were no signs of any movement in the entrances to the grove. The creature had not given off any noticeable scent, and no sound aside from his companions could be heard. This was surely just an ability to shift his form into something easier to hide with. But if it wasn't, could he have traveled instantaneously outside the grove? If it was a mysterious form of movement, had he appeared somewhere that might be in the sight of others? Madame Athel seemed to have the same concern cross her mind. "Lord Cernier, I think you should command the weapon's return." He nodded, calling out, "Jin, your ability to hide has been rather fascinating. Please become visible and return to our sight at once." The high-pitched laugh from directly above Seth made him jump, and looking up, he saw the creature, back in solid color, grasping the overhead boughs at the top of the grove with all 4 of its limbs, transformed into grasping claws.
"I've been visible for the last 30 seconds. It's not my fault you've got the eyesight of a newborn rabbit."
It clambered unnaturally across the trees, dropping down in its original location with an extravagant flourish, shifting its arms and legs back to normal as it did so. Seth noticed it was breathing a little more noticeably than usual, the first time it had done so since awakening.
"It seems, Master Cernier, that I felt it necessary to show off my most incredible ability first. Yes, I can shift my form to become much harder to see, and it is something I can do for extended periods of time."
With that, it began to alter the colors on its skin and clothes, not quite disappearing, but making it far harder for Seth to make out where it ended and where the grove around it began, though its form remained solid. Jin continued its explanation as it returned to its usual colors.
"However, what I did earlier was to transform myself to be completely intangible to every sense that exists in this world. No barrier or defense is impregnable to me."
It took a deep breath, then resumed its utterly calm demeanor.
"But it is quite difficult to keep up for very long."
Despite the surprise of the reveal, Seth realized just how useful such a silent eye must have been. "So, you used its ability to move with utter secrecy to reveal the weaknesses of my father's foes, aiding him in battle."
"I aided your father? Please, you really shouldn't try telling jokes. I don't think you're capable of humor anyway. No, every single one of your father's enemies fell to me alone, and all in well less than a day."
Seth was stunned. He had always pictured his father wielding the secret weapon in some capacity, charging ahead with valiant might. Even after meeting Jin, he had assumed they had fought side by side. He quickly turned to Madame Athel. "Is that true? Was the battle so short?" She closed her eyes, her brows tensed in what Seth thought solemn remembrance. "Yes, no one but a scant few in the Citadel even knew of the battle's occurrence until weeks later." A new fear threatened Seth. Was his father's grand deed executed as a coward's plot? Did his enemies never even see his face? He stared at the grinning weapon. "How was this done, Jin? You didn't infect them with some poison from the shadows, I hope."
"Allow me to answer with a question. Do you think so low of me, Lord Cernier? I am one of the most powerful creatures in existence, and you would liken me to a scorned cook. No, I faced every single one in open combat, and slew them with my bladed self. I hold no poison, just this wealth of knives."
With that, Jin formed into a hideous beast, 4 canine legs extending in opposite directions, and a humanoid torso in the center made of pulsating, rippling blades, several of which flung outwards and pierced into some of the trees with a dull crack reverberating throughout the grove. El fell back from his seat with a cry, and Madame Athel stood up, instinctively ready to call for guards. Seth tensed at seeing such a monstrous form, but having seen Jin transform before, he was more relieved at his father's honor being kept, though by how much he wasn't sure. "Return to your hooded form, Jin. I am satisfied with that display." Madame Athel sat down slowly, her eyes never leaving Jin as he shifted back to his grinning self. She whispered in a low voice, "Lord Cernier, are you certain of your control? This creature is eccentric, and I am not convinced it doesn't bear some sort of evil." "I am certain, though I find it detestable as well." Seth eyed it warily as it bowed theatrically over and over to El's applause. "It leaves such a wretched pit in my stomach, but we have little choice. That attack just now proves its usefulness. It hardly seems fazed or weakened at all by such an onslaught, and it—" Seth paused. Something was off about Jin. He thought it was nothing more than a trick of the light, but now that it had stopped its egotistical show, it was certainly clear that the creature had grown smaller. He quickly walked over to it to be sure, interrupting the boast it was making to El about how bone was like butter to its blades.
"What is it, Master Cernier? Getting a bit jealous?"
"On the contrary, you seem to have lost a few inches with that last attack." Seth was right, now that the creature was almost exactly his height.
"Well, naturally. Allow me to collect myself for a moment."
Jin held out his arms, and each one of the embedded daggers began to shift and turn into a black ichor that began to drip down to the grass. Then each puddle crept along the ground towards the grinning figure in the center. It was undeniably creepy, seeing all of them slip on flat earth as a stream flowing down a steep hill would, but in the several seconds it took, Elle spoke out what Seth was thinking.
It's neat you can even do that, but it's a rather slow return, hmm?
Yes, Seth agreed. Any foe could have run you through several times over.
Don't be daft, I can clearly move while doing this,
Jin retorted with a snapping tone, swiftly leaping over to puddle after puddle, and growing larger with each one it stepped upon and absorbed, its form bulging and realigning each time until it was back to its original size.
See?
So it didn't like being insulted either, at least when the criticism had merit behind it. With every immense ability it boasted of, there was always something keeping it from being absolutely unstoppable. Nevertheless, Seth couldn't easily imagine a situation where such weaknesses would actually matter. Your agility is noted. Now, are there other skills you have yet to show, or would they simply be extensions of what you have already performed?
I suppose extensions would be accurate, though they number greater than the stars in the sky.
Jin laughed, and it began to leap backwards in acrobatic maneuvers, shifting into several figures, each wielding a monstrous-looking weapon, or with appendages that whistled through the air.
With these three, my ability to form into anything that exists and everything beyond, my unbending blades which could carve even rock, and my omniscient eyes which can see every hidden fragment of reality, nothing is outside of my skills, and everything is within your reach while I'm beside you. So shall you order me as to what you would have me do?
As it finished, it returned once more to its original form, staring at Seth with its nostrils flaring. A single drop of dark saliva fell from the side of its mouth, striking its foot and disappearing as it was absorbed once more.
Or will you continue to torture this poor body with the scent of succulent morsels for even longer?
Seth glanced at the baskets, both of which were being fully collected and set upon the small table by Madame Athel. Right, apologies. As I promised, the mission for why I awakened you will be discussed over this meal. You are free to eat, though I don't know how much exactly you desire. Jin leapt over to the table, snatching up the basket filled with loaves and sealed bowls of eggs. 3 long-clawed hands manifested, bursting from its chest, and all 5 monstrous limbs began shoveling the stuff into a horrifically elongated mouth. Seth just stared at the sheer animalistic fervor in shock. Though it had clearly been inhuman from the beginning, Jin still had a clear sense of restraint and wit with which it carried itself, but all of that had entirely vanished as it tore through the entire basket in mere seconds.
Heinz teeth!
Elle whispered, stepping slowly away from the table.
Do you have it under control, Seth?
Madame Athel hissed. Yes. Seth cleared his throat, mostly to calm himself, and he shouted.
Pace yourself and return to sanity.
With that, Jin stopped mid-bite and slowly, almost reluctantly, got off of the table. As its terrifying variant returned to a human-like form, Elle let out a sigh of relief, but Seth and Madame Athel's tension remained. Jin bowed, and with as apologetic a look as its satisfied face could muster, it said,
Dear me, I got a little overexcited. My compliments to the chef, this meal is absolutely delicious, but that is all I need for now.
However, its eyes were only gazing toward the second basket. If you desire it so much, you are free to have it as well, on the condition that you do so while remaining in control of your mind. Seth trembled at the sudden worry this display of madness brought about. I will not have you going beyond your own reason, and mistakenly destroying something or hurting someone.
I can assure you, Master Cernier, that I was still well within my own mind. I would never do something, even in the thrill of a feast, that would be against your wishes. As you have directed me to do so, observe.
It sat down on the seating near the table with a delicate air, lifted the fork and knife which had scattered onto the ground, and elegantly began cutting a nearly torn egg in small pieces.
Again, what are you?
Elle reaffixed his triocular glasses and slowly approached Jin once more.
We brought a bigger sum of food than the whole Lake Wolf Apprehension Squad could eat in a day, and you've all but devoured half of it.
It swallowed its bite, demonstratively so, before answering.
What can I say? I simply meet Master Cernier's commands to the absolute letter.
Well, Elle exclaimed, turning to Madame Athel, it's a good thing we mentioned to the others that such a surplus was essential for our discussion.
Seth glanced at them in concern. How would reading this much hide the presence of Jin? Did you say we were meeting with someone else? She nodded. That is so. When we heard the order from Valmir, there were some murmurings among the servants about why we desired such a quantity. We informed them that there was a certain issue we needed to discuss in private involving the upcoming feast with some of the leaders of the Garfelians, but that the details were not to be known. As such, we had plenty of freedom to provide as much as we thought would possibly be necessary. She looked at Jin with a worried frown. Even so, it appears we sorely underestimated it. Jin chuckled between bites.
Even if it was just you three, I don't see why they were confused about why so much food was ordered. I'm sure someone here eats that much on a daily basis.
Seth shot the creature a glare, but El simply laughed it off.
Oh, certainly. I've been trying to get Lord Cernier on a diet for years now, but nothing's worked so far.
Jin blinked in confusion at the flippancy of such a retort, and it returned to eating its meal silently. Fortunately, the other basket had remained untouched, and so the three of them took their portions, though Seth couldn't feel enough hunger to take more than a small sampling. He pointed at Jin. If you are done with your remarks, listen well to why it is I awakened you. Seth took off Cullen's satchel and set it on the table, removing the 2 breastplates from it. We have been informed by a Carfelian forager named Cullen that there are 2 forces, clans Markelt and Rotrar, who are invading the valley. We need you to assist us with stopping this force by any means.
I was wondering why you were lugging around those 2 pieces of armor for a while. It's good to see that your paranoia isn't so great that you would bring multiple sets everywhere in case something happened to one of them, but the theory did cross my mind many times.
I wouldn't wear something so brazen anyway, Seth snapped, ignoring the creature's grin in response. These clans are aggressive and dangerous. They hail from the harsh deserts to the north, and they wield strange and powerful weapons and beasts. Cullen saw them at the ruins of Traveler's Pass, northwest of this citadel, and he estimated they'd be here within a few weeks. However, we shan't immediately attack or kill them just yet.
And why is that?
Jin queried, with what sounded almost like a petulant whine. Did it desire to kill so much? We must be absolutely certain peaceful diplomacy is off the table. My fears have only prevented death in the past. I won't have them cause it needlessly.
Agreed. Ignorance is certainly bliss.
Jin's retort carried the same intention of insult as before, but before Seth could respond, the creature continued.
By the way, how exactly do you know that this Cullen isn't setting you up?
He chuckled as Seth glanced at him in confusion.
If that plant wrangler is the only source for your knowledge, then is it not possible that he's either lying, or even worse, that he is on the side of the outsiders, underreporting just how deadly the onslaught will be for a cushy place in the new order?
Both anger at the accusation of one of Seth's own people, and the whispering of fear that there was no way to prove otherwise rose in his throat at those words. However, the determination and earnestness in the forager's report stilled them quickly. Though it is within the realm of possibility, I find it more likely that you would seek to betray me first. The knowledge Cullen has couldn't have come from local stories or lies, and his ignorance of anything substantial about the clans proves he hasn't interacted with them enough to form an alliance. Besides, there are those he wishes to protect in the valley, so he would never help those outsiders. Madame Ethel murmured. Unless that very desire to protect is one of his motives for siding with them. She looked at Seth intently. I was not there to see his determination that you speak of, but it would be foolish to dismiss his betrayal as a possibility. It may be a reason as to why these outsiders know of the valley in the first place. If Cullen traveled to the desert on one of his expeditions, that could have been the impetus for this entire invasion. Seth clutched his fork tight as he looked at her with sternful eyes. I understand your concern, but if we cannot even trust those of the valley in this matter, then we are already doomed. Besides, there are many other possible reasons as to how they know of the valley, even just because of our travels long ago, so I shan't accuse Cullen of this without reason. She nodded in reply. I suppose it would be unusual if loyalties of the Carfelians were to falter now. My apologies. Such trivial concerns are unlike me. Jin grinned.
I'm not sure if ignoring potential problems will help them disappear, but hey, I've never tried that before, so let's go for it.
It's not a potential problem, Jin. A proper example of one would be if you underestimate them. You succeeded in the past, but exactly how many did you fight at once?
Armed warriors?
Jin set down the utensils, and its hands quickly formed dozens of tiny new fingers, all stretching forth like some cursed flower blossoming.
About 33, if my perfect memory is correct, though some were truly fierce, so I'd say each of those were worth at least 5 men. Boy, I had a fun time with those guys.
It smirked at the Jenner Knight's unnerved faces as it began plucking out and devouring several pieces of fruit at once with the hideous appendages, all with a dainty precision. Then you should know that the enemy numbers at several hundred at least, and all of them are prepared for any attack. Jin dropped the empty jar onto the table.
Well then, I'll simply adapt to deal with such overwhelming odds. When it comes to an army, the ability to divide them first into small groups of 4 to 5 men, then to divide those into groups of 30 to 50 is essential, and that's an ability I have in spades.
The grim image disturbed Seth, but he nodded. At the very least, you can certainly slow them. There was something beyond Jin's words that was nagging at him, whispering in his mind that something had changed about it. As the creature put away its fourth jar, leaning back in its chair in satisfaction, Seth realized what it was. Jin, it has occurred to me that you are larger than when you entered the grove. The others started, looking at it with a new interest, and even Jin's eyes turned gray and it went still for a moment. Indeed, its height had increased by an inch or two, though the form itself hadn't been stretched or bent. That unchanging volume had increased.
You were right, Master Cernier. Moderation is a virtue.
Jin stepped away from the table, though with all but one jar having been devoured, it was a fairly empty resolution. Seth wondered if this growth was the only result of the ravenous actions of the creature, or if other side effects might exist, side effects which might bring about unforeseen results. Either way, it was important that it didn't do anything that might cause this operation to fail. Until you return, I command you not to eat any food or feasts that you may encounter. If you have no need of it, and if you didn't partake of it under my father's rule, then it may be foolish to have you continue. It bowed in uncharacteristic humility.
A wise choice, Master Cernier. I shall avoid such temptations, I promise.
He looked to the two Giarnos, who expressed horror and interest in turn at the revelation. Looking beyond that, is there anything else that will be essential for Jin's mission? El snapped his fingers. The Carfelian range is pretty far away, and we really need all the information we can get. Cullen's report is useful, but any new developments might require us to alter the plan. What if they do have a spy, but it's some other Carfelian? If that's the case, it could prove disastrous. He leaned forward on the table. So, Ginny, do you have any other minor powers of communication, even just with your master? Seth nodded. Perhaps with your ability to observe, as you put it, I could give you signals at a certain time each day, and you would respond in some way, like with smoke or something similar.
Though my capacity to see goes beyond any other creature, those mountains seem rather far away. I'm afraid that my observation has a definite limit as well. I can see everything that goes on from here to the very edge of your big castle there. I'd estimate it's a little over 300 feet, which is more than enough to keep tabs on any who dare to spy or those whom I'm about to kill.
The limits of this creature just continue to reveal themselves. You can't speak to my mind directly, you can only observe just outside the citadel, and your hearing is only slightly better than a human's.
Well, more than slightly, I'd say. I can hear a whisper in a crowded room from over 50 feet away.
But not 1,000. Seth rubbed his chin. El's right, I need a way to be in communication with you, as much as possible at that, considering how far away this mission may take you. Jin exhaled a soft chuckle.
Again, I am not used to long expeditions, Master Cernier. I can't say that the need for such a thing has ever arisen.
There were already so many variables that were beyond Seth's control. The idea that even this might be added to that list made him feel nauseous. Was there truly no other way? He glanced towards the others and saw El's face light up. I may just have an idea. Sergiano drummed his fingers rhythmically on the table. You have shown your ability to separate your form into multiple distinct fragments, yet each was still bound to one mind while being far flung from the main body. That is true, yes? Jin grinned in response.
Exactly so, Five Eyes, and it is one I learned all on my own in the midst of battle.
And even if you don't need sustenance to survive, it seems like it still benefits you in some way. As Seth noticed, your form has noticeably increased in size, yet without any sacrifice to your waist.
Yes, so it seems.
Good, so I presume you can afford to give back what you've just gobbled up. El stood up and grabbed the empty fruit jar from the ground and set it on the table. You see where I'm going with this, don't you, Seth? Relief washed over Seth as a realization struck him. Of course, that's it. He turned towards Jin, whose grin had shrunk slightly. Separate a small part of yourself, no bigger than the daggers you used, and place it in the jar. Give it an ear to hear, an eye to see, and a mouth to speak. Jin walked slowly up to the table, and forming a small black orb where its hand had been, placed it gently, almost reluctantly, in the jar. A single bright green eye opened on it, as did the ear and tiny mouth that Seth had requested. With that, El closed the lid on the jar tightly. Seth smiled. Excellent. Can you see and hear me through your extension in the jar, Jin?
Yes, it seems that I can,
Jin sighed, both in and out of the jar at the same time.
Your intelligence is rather remarkable as far as masters go. Certainly the highest since I awoke half an hour ago, and if you include the manatee.
El laughed. Considering we don't know what a manatee is, I'll take that as a compliment. Seth ignored the diminishing grin on Jin, informing that manatee certainly wasn't a compliment. Even so, he took note of how effortlessly El managed to defame Jin's insults. Your fragments, though you can control them, don't appear to be as powerful as your main self. I can assume this probably applies to your observation from them as well, so I will be keeping the jar in the archives at the top of the citadel. It's almost always quiet there, so you won't be disturbed, and you won't disturb others. I still intend on keeping you a secret to most, at least until I am assured of peace. With that, he undid his outer coat and flung it over the jar. It was thick enough to ensure that Jin wouldn't be disturbed or distracted, and the shiny green made it seem more like a jewelry case than a hidden creature.
All these secrets again. I don't see why you're so scared of being called a tyrant because of little old me. I don't think your mewling self could be considered one if you tried.
Seth attempted a glare. I will contact you regularly. So in summary, you can sneak through large amounts of people and animals without being seen, and can fight entire hordes without fear of death, and now we know you can speak with us from anywhere. Does that sound right to you, Madam Athel? She was silent for a moment, staring with the intense scrutiny Seth had long known at the creature. Then she sighed and spoke. To my understanding, yes, but our control must be certain. Jin chuckled, even softer this time, and grinned at Seth.
Honestly, I'm impressed you don't call her Lord Athel, considering how often you look to her call on every matter.
Seth was getting quite tired of this. He cleared his throat, saying, Well, I think it would be best if we begin the final instruction, Jin. Sir Giorno will... Jin clapped his hands once, interrupting Seth.
I've just realized we've almost got ourselves a complete reunion. There's not much we can do about the old master if Twiggy was the one who awakened me, but what about that other guard? He can't be too old for this. Let's call him in.
Seth's annoyance began to burn inside him as Jin went on. Was this creature even his to control at all? He was a Surnir, wasn't he? Or did it only care about obeying his father's voice? Madame Athel and Sir Giorno were barely even looking at Seth as the creature gabbed on, though their furtive glances towards him were only those of worry, as if they were harboring the same thoughts. If Jin barely acknowledged him now, how could he trust it to obey his orders, to help his people? The burning annoyance distilled in his stomach into a cold blue flame of fear and anger. It was more than the simple indicator of feeling it had been earlier. Now it gave Seth the strength he needed. More than that, it thrust that strength upon him. Fine. He had proved Jin couldn't read minds, so it didn't matter if everyone else besides it knew Seth was weak. If the creature only cared for the will of his father, then that's what he'd give it. He stood up, slammed his fist on the table with one hand, and pointed down at Jin with the other. Silence, and listen to me, slime. I said it would be best if we begin the instruction. I've given you more than enough courtesy. What makes you think you have any right to interrupt your master? Seth's heart was pounding, but so long as he held this tone, the creature would think it nothing more than wrath. Jin almost winced, and it shrugged apologetically.
I'm sorry, Master Surnir. I just felt a rush of nostalgia, and had to see if I could...
The only rush of nostalgia you should feel is that ridiculous-looking handblade of yours ending the lives of those who threaten the peace of the valley. The creature shrunk back and nodded silently. First and foremost, you are to find the Carfelian forager named Cullen and keep him safe from clans Markelt and Rotrar, as well as any dangers that he might find himself in, all the while keeping yourself hidden from anyone else. You will know him by the large mountain boar he keeps with him. He knows the region well, so any of your quivering qualms about long expeditions can be rectified by his guidance. You should be able to catch up to him with your speed, but if he is lost to us, then you are to put every fragment of your energy into executing my second order. He picked up the dinner knife and drove it onto the sigil of the breastplate on the table. You are to end this effort of the outsiders at Traveler's Pass by any means necessary. Find the two armies bearing these symbols, and make them turn back, even if they must suffer. Weaken them, frighten them, make them curse the day they began their climb. If you must slay every last one of them to accomplish this, then I command you to do so. The valley must be kept safe. Is that understood? Jin just stared at Seth for a moment, its eyes wide as twin moons. Then it gained a slight smile and asked,
And what if these contradict one another? If the forager starts serving these clans out of greed or defiance, or if he's a dirty traitor who was against you all along, shall I continue to keep your enemy safe?
How dare this creature continue to accuse his people of such things? Fine. If it was trying to poke at his trust in them, then he would prove that trust in the fiercest way possible. If Cullen betrays me out of his own free and complete will, then he was never a child of the valley in the first place. If so, you will treat him as such. Seth stepped up and onto the table, knocking crumbs and jars aside as he stared down at Jin's wide-eyed form. "Now if you ever talk back to me again, or upon Hind's fall disobey me, I shall have you return to your tomb, seal you away deep underground, and ensure you are never awakened again. I've seen how much you enjoy the wonders of consciousness, despite your efforts to dissuade me of that fact. I know you fear this, and so you shall fear me. Am I understood? Speak." Jin's mouth opened and closed silently, as if desperately trying to think of what to say before shrinking back and simply nodding.
"Yes, Lord Sernir," it whispered.
"Good. Now be off, and speak to me only when you find the forager or the enemy." Immediately, Jin shifted into its many-limbed, lizard-like form and scurried into the night beyond, fading like a dark dream. Seth waited a few seconds, still vehemently staring after it, before falling to his knees on the table. He let out a sigh filled with all the weight of the valley, then turned to face the others. To his surprise, their concerned stares were not aimed towards the creature's disturbing exit, but upon Seth. El shivered. "You were like a man possessed. What happened? Why did you command the creature so suddenly? Why include the boy's death like you were adding an item to the register?" "I did what was necessary. It was getting harder and harder to get that twisted weapon to obey me. It would barely listen to reason without such force. Besides, Cullen won't betray me." A wry thought passed through his head, and he smirked at the absurd simplicity. He can't now, so there's no need to worry any more about that. That wasn't why I brought it up as a concern. Seth could tell Madame Athel was about ready to collapse as well. The sheer horror, revelation, and resolution of the day felt as if it added years to both their lives. It certainly had for him. But you're right. All worries in that regard are pointless. Now I finally understand why. Her eyes appeared vacant, as if she was staring past him. El glanced between the two of them before clearing his throat. "Look, both of you. I'll take care of cleaning the grove. It looks like a beast ran wild in it, and these baskets need to be returned. You two get yourselves to a bed, and rest beneath wisdom and all that, all right?" He began collecting the jars and utensils with a quick and mumbling scurrying, as if his focus would blot out what he'd just seen. Seth couldn't blame him, and welcomed the release from any more duties for today. In a way, if Jin was as powerful as he said he was, even this catastrophic threat might already be dealt with, though to even hope for such a thing was horrendously ridiculous. The gardens were almost completely empty, but even the few late-night gardeners who were there to ensure that the special flora weren't compromised by the cold barely cast a glance at Seth as he returned to the warm citadel. He shivered as he realized just how cold it had been after using his coat as a way to hide Jin, and how easily he was no longer seen as a lord without wearing the glimmering green of his house. Fortunately, the dinner feast had finished, and the few servants placing the final touches on the last duties of the day shared the similar disinterest of the gardeners. Valmir also remained at the base of the stairwell, seemingly asleep on his padded seat. As Seth approached silently, his old eyes sprung open, bleary and red from drinking.
"Please, my lord, that thing, don't use it don't taint your soul, please."
Valmir fell to his knees before Seth as he cupped his face, silent sobs racking his body. Seth's mouth was dry as he tried to swallow. Never before had he seen the old guard in such a state.
"It's wrong. Shouldn't exist. Tears apart your heart, your humanity, everything."
Before Seth could respond, Marchi stepped between them, helping Valmir to his feet. "I'll take care of him, Lord Sernir. He refused the tea, but I must have failed to notice the reason why." His ancestral accent had returned slightly, as the intensity of the day must have been enough to weaken even his steadfast demeanor. As they began moving down the hall to the living quarters, the servant glanced back. "All these years, and you haven't led us astray. If you still claim hope, then we yet have it. Such is the power of a lord." With that, Seth was left alone with the fragment of gin still squirming in the jar under his arm. Despite Marchi's reassurance, Valmir's words remained ringing in his mind. What had caused such unfettered fear? What exactly had happened 30 years ago? Seth stumbled up the stairs, the jar of gin still hidden under his folded lordly vesture. Thinking of that reminded him of the celebrational feast and all of the duties it would require. Oh, high keepers be praised that it wasn't tomorrow. A wave of guilt threw itself against the back of Seth's mind, but it was muted and dulled by his exhaustion. It didn't matter. If there were any mistakes, he could rectify them with gin in the morning. Seth set the jar on a stand near his bedside. The low light of the singular globe cast its shadow dancing over the whole room, appearing as dark flames that covered the image of his father above. He quickly dimmed it, disturbed by the image. Even with it obscured, however, he could still hear the faint pulse of the many jinn's movement, though it mercifully continued to obey his order to remain silent. As he closed his eyes upon the bed, all of his thoughts and worries whirled about him. Enemies at the pass, sulphurous spirits at his side. What a nightmare this all was. The last thing he needed was to have himself joining the onslaught on his mind. What I did was necessary, and now there is hope for the valley. The briefest reprieve that thought granted Seth from his torment cast him into a deeper sleep than any in his life.